I am Stephen Foreman. Like I said, you can go to my YouTube. Please subscribe to my YouTubes. Also on my Facebook channel, please share my Facebooks and like my Facebooks. And then, just basically share with groups, share with individuals. Just let as many people know to subscribe to my YouTube channel so I can get 1,000 YouTubes. That's the new rule for YouTube, so that I can be able to go live to YouTube and stream live to YouTube. So that would be great. I can let people know about my painting. So I'm going to start out by just breaking out my palette. And generally some of the tools, the painting, the tools of an artist are very simple. Paper towels. And actually this palette here, you don't have to buy these. I'm just using saran wrap. I'm working in oil paints. I work with the Galkit system, the Gambling system, I should say. It's a brand of professional paints called Gambling. That's my favorite paints. Because of the fact they make bio-friendly paints. In other words, they don't give off any bad fumes. So that's another tip I can give you if you want paints where you don't have bad fumes. And instead of using turpentine, I use this Gamsol. And I can show you a close-up of that Gamsol. Okay, and what Gamsol does is it is like turpentine, but if you open it up to smell it, it smells like water. So it smells exactly like the spring water that I drink. So therefore, very biologically friendly. I think it's made out of some type of, it's of the highest refinement, but it's made out of some type of flowers, which again, flowers are made from nature. So everything is very, very natural. So I like that. And I put my Gamsol in these little bottles like this. And then also I use Galkit, which is a replacement for linseed oil. Linseed oil is got a little bit of a smell to it, but I actually kind of like the smell. It's kind of like my artist studio potpourri. But they make this Galkit. This is also made out of some type of flower that they grow in, I think, in Washington State. This dries in 24 hours. This dries in about 48 hours. I generally make a combination of this and Gamsol for my medium that I use, because I like my medium to dry in about 36 hours so that I can paint the next day and my paint is still wet. Okay, so that's kind of what I use. And what I do is you can just get a little small piece of thin plyboard, or you can get masonite board, but any type of thin board from the hardware store, and you just cut this little kind of a liver shape out and then put a hole in there like this, so you can hold it like that, and you put your thumb like that. And you can make your own palette. And then what you do is get white gesso and paint it with about 3 or 4 coats. And if you want to get it slick with it, you can even get a little bit of just a little bit of shellac, or you can get polyurethane and you can hit it with that. But I don't. I just simply use my regular old linseed oil, coat it with that, and then let that sit for about 48 hours, and then I have a palette. So they're almost super cheap if you do your palette this way. Then I use these little cups like this that clip onto the side of the palette like so. And I like the 2-cupper because in 1 cup I just put straight Gamsol so I can clean my brushes really quickly. Then the other one, I'll put my mixture of my medium in there so I can get my medium, and then I can clean my brushes. And then sometimes I want to thin out the medium because I just don't want it as shiny. And then you can also get the kind that clips on with the cups on it. And that's if you want to save your, and you can see I actually have some medium that I made, but this is when I work in darker colors right now. And sometimes I do like darker paintings like this one over here where the background is real dark. I use that medium because it's dirty medium. It doesn't matter because my colors are almost black anyway. So, that way I can kind of conserve my medium. I use a variety of brushes. My favorite brushes are Winsor Newtons. Then I have some Italian brushes, and I have some Spanish brushes from Spain that I really like. And then, of course, I get the El Cheapos from Art Plaza and near VCU in Richmond. So that's basically what I use in terms of brushes. And I'm just all over the place with brushes, but my absolute favorite, I think, is Winsor Newtons. And then my next favorite is this Raphael brush here. And this is a fresco brush, red sable brush. So this is another one of my favorite brands of brushes. But it's just because it says Raphael, and I like Raphael as a painter, as one of the old masters. So I don't have that many of them because they're expensive, but they're like, I believe they're Italian brushes. And then, of course, I have these, and this Fresco, I think, is the name of the company that makes these. So I like these brushes quite a bit. However, I mean, any brush will work because they're made out of, the bristle brushes are made out of pig's hair. The saber brush, I don't know what type of animal, but it's like just a softer hair, like a more of a fur, like a soft fur, like a fur coat. And just allows you to put on like more subtle kind of tones and blend better with that brush. Okay, with that said, I'm gonna go ahead and mix my medium. I'm gonna start out by just putting in a little bit of gal kit, and I put about a dime in the bottom of that. So it's not a whole lot of this that you need. And this is enough for basically a 4-hour painting session. And actually I wound up putting a quarter in there worth of that. So that's a little much. And I usually don't put that much in. And then what I do is I'm gonna put in, maybe, since I have a quarter in there, I'm gonna put a dime of linseed oil in there. And that's kind of like my mixture. And that gives me just the perfect slow time. And then I put the rest, I've mixed this half of what I already have in it. So I put a quarter and a dime's worth of Gamsol in there. Then I have this little baby spoon, and I just use the metal part of it and stir that up and mix it up really good so it's nice and consistent mixture. And this is gonna give me just the amount of gloss I need and just the amount of matte I need, so my paint, especially on these bottom coats that I have on now, is not too shiny. I don't want the paint too shiny, but at the same time, I don't want the paint dull and flat either. So this is the best medium for that. And then what I do is I put a little bit of Gamsol. But before I do that, I think I'm gonna pour some of this medium out, because sometimes I'm handling the thing and it will spill over if it's too high. And actually I put in just a little bit too much. So what I'm gonna do is take this guy off just really quickly and pour some of this into here. And then what I could do is later, if I do another session, which probably I am gonna do, and that still might be too high. Okay, that's about right. Okay, so that way I won't spill and I have juice running all down my arms as I'm working, which happens sometimes. You know, I just want like, I want like the bottom quarter of these cups with the medium in it. I don't really want the whole, you know, cup half full or almost full, because it's definitely going to spill all over the place. And first of all, it costs, there's a little cost to it. And then second of all, you got medium all over yourself. So even though it's biologically friendly, it's just not the best way to work. And then what I do is I put a little bit of just pure Gamsol in this cup. Like I say, just enough to have about 1/4 of the way full, just so I can have something to clean my brushes with. And then I'm ready to rock. So what I'm gonna do here is, you know, the hardest part about painting sometimes is where you're gonna start. And sometimes I do like to kind of refresh my palette, but I think my palette is very fresh right now, you know, and exciting. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to start with and I have some certain brushes I pulled out, what I intend to use. I kind of stay as organized as possible. It helps to keep me focused and in the game. So I'm going to start out with this titanium brush. It's another brand I'm just kind of throwing out there, but actually this is okay brush. Titanium makes okay brushes, but not the best. So, but I like this particular brush because it's the #1 round brush and allows me to do some details. So, and that's what I really want to do right here, start out with some details. So I'm going to start out with some titanium white with just a little bit of cadmium medium mixed in. And I'm going to kind of fix some areas that I worked on earlier. Like, also sometimes when I'm working, I don't really use a stool. I use these little apple boxes so I can kind of get down to where I need to get and get my painting in. And of course, if I do use a stool, sometimes that gets in the way. You know, when you got a little tight studio, it's really hard to get everything the way you want. So anyway, plop down here, and I'm going to just refine this image some on this guy's skirt here. This is a processional, and they're going down the street in Luxor, Egypt. And of course, this is the depiction of an ancient scene. And I'm just going to just do a little update here because I just don't like the way the leg look, the anatomy underneath the skirt. I just want the skirt to look like it's kind of going forward a little bit. And this skirt actually looks like his knee is pushing toward the skirt. And I really don't want that. So I'm going to just change this just a little bit and kind of get it a little bit more the way I want. And not because sometimes when you paint kind of the way you think something should go and not the way that it actually should go. And because you're just so deep into the painting, you just don't really see that. So what I'm going to do now is paint the way it should go. So there. So now the front of this skirt is actually forward. And then this part of the leg here, this upper part of the leg or thigh, is coming down more. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is keep my brush kind of pure by getting another brush. So I'm getting another number, I think that's number 1 round. And this might be a number 2 round, but this is the El Cheapo brush. You can see I paint with that. This is easy as I paint, and this brush is held up pretty good for a cheap brush. But I paint with that just as easy as I paint with a little bit more expensive brushes, because really is the way that the fibers go. You know, it's not necessarily the way, you know, it's not the brush is going to deteriorate as you use it anyway. So you might buy an expensive brush that's really nice when you first get it. And you say, okay, this is worth the $15, $20 I spent for the brush. But then over time, that brush will start to deteriorate a little bit. And then you go, okay, well, now I just bought a cheap brush that's painting just as good as that much more expensive brush. So it might be a good idea just to get in the medium brushes is kind of in the medium, because they're not going to be 100% of what you originally got anyway. So that might be a little tip to help somebody who's just learning how to paint. So you can save a little bit of money. Of course, the more money you save, the more money you have to buy more canvases and to do, you know, more work. So, or to just do other things with your family that you might want to do with the same money, you know. So, just a little tip that I have there in terms of brushes. A lot of times people think, oh yeah, I don't spend that much for brushes, therefore my painting doesn't look as good as somebody else's. But really, that really doesn't have a lot to do with it. It has more to do with your skill, you know, your ability to actually paint, than it has to do with the type of brushes you use. But I have to admit, some brushes can make your work a lot easier, and some brushes can make your work a little bit harder. So it's kind of like a little bit of a fine line there. So now that I kind of revised that some, which makes me feel better, I can go work on another part of the painting that's probably more exciting for you guys to watch. And for those who've been watching it from the beginning, when I was on my other Facebook account, I started out with a blank canvas 20 days ago, and I've been basically doing about 5 hours of work on this per day. And this is what I got accomplished in about 5 hours per day for 20 days. And so I like this pace here, and I like the size and the pace that I'm able to do this at. And I hope to improve even on that. So that's that. And I like to paint in this particular style that I'm painting in, because what it does, it kind of gives me the ability to kind of just get a feel for I can kind of put the images down and get kind of like a style or a stick. You know, I can get kind of interface with things just a little bit more. How's it going, Alakar? How's it going, Atia? Voss, how you doing? How you doing, everybody? Okay. So, all right. So there we go. I just basically fixed that, and that makes me feel a little bit better, just a little bit better. I think I'm gonna make one more adjustment, and then I think I feel really, really good about this after that. Okay. There we go. Now we're cooking. Now we're cooking with it. All right. Okay, so feeling good about that little piece right there. that makes me feel a lot better about that. So next, what we're going to do is, so I'm going to find the next thing that I want to update. And right now, that's all I'm doing is I'm going in and refining everything, just going around the painting, finding things that I would like to refine. Now, I don't know what you guys can see on that in terms of details, in terms of how clear that is on Facebook or YouTube. But, you know, just it is getting updated. It's getting refined. And the painting is getting just sharper and sharper, more details, just more interesting things. So I'm always looking to put more interesting things. And I'm doing research. I find pictures sometimes online, and then sometimes I go to the local fine arts museum. Of course, now that we had this coronavirus, I cannot go to the local fine art because they have like a SETI, a fresco, a wall of hieroglyphs there, and I can actually take pictures with my phone, and I can make sketches and things like that and get ideas, you know, because you see the things in person, but sometimes you just can't see the things in person that you want to see. So, and so you have to make do with grabbing things online because you just can't go see the stuff in person. So that is the downside of the coronavirus right now. The upside, I always look at the upside no matter how bad things is. The upside for the coronavirus for me is it forces me to spend more time in my studio painting in self-quarantine. So basically, like many of you, you're probably self-quarantining, but the government says do. And, you know, as a painter, I'm always self-quarantining anyway because I'm isolated. Oftentimes, it's not hard to be able to find me because I'm going to be in my studio painting. So if you know my location in my studio, you know how to give me a holler and come around and say, hey, what's up? What's up, Steve? How you doing? I'm going to sit down and watch you paint for a couple of hours. I know it's going to be boring to me, but at least you get some company. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint a little bit of hieroglyphics here in this column. And since I already have some things going, I mean, and then that way we can see a little bit of things kind of develop here. So I'm going to paint just a little bit of this in. And of course, hieroglyphics is a language. I mean, it's a picture language. And with the picture language, what it is they actually are saying what these pictures are depicting. And in the ancient days, in the antiquities, what it was actually for the person, the Kemetu society. So they can know, so the king could communicate the ideas that the king needed to communicate to the people. So I'm going to go in with a relatively dark color. And I'm just going to kind of put in, and right now I'm just going to kind of put in the hieroglyphics. And I'm using an example from the Luxor Temple. Now, I believe this is Ramesses, and actually we call him Ramesses because that's what the Egyptologists tell you his name is. But actually, that is his nickname, perhaps, or it could be a nickname that the chematologists gave him, the Egyptologists gave him. But in real life, you know, just like we don't say, for example, as a President Barack Obama, we wouldn't call him Barry, you know. That wouldn't be... He wouldn't be known for that. Nobody, if you say, hey, Barry did this, nobody know what you're saying. But if you say President Barack Obama did this, or just say, for example, even Donald Trump, you wouldn't say Donnie because that's not who he is. He's Donald Trump, President Donald. You would use his title. So his name was not Ramesses. The Ramesses III, let's see, his name was Ursa Ma'at Ra Tesepet Ra. That was his official name. That was the name most likely if you said to an ancient Egyptian or a Kemetu person, they would go, oh, I know you were talking about. You're talking about that king. So that's a whole lot for the average English speaker anyway to remember. So therefore they kind of get it down to something really simple for us. And they say Ramesses. And because it sounds like Moses, so they wanted to make it sound like Moses. But like Mosi, actually, it wasn't Moses, that's Greek. The ancient Egyptians pronounced it Moshi, or Mosi. And it means born of the Nile, you know. born of the happy river, actually born of this waterway that you see. In other words, I'm from here, where this river goes. I was born from here. So that's what Mosi means. I know in the Bible they give it different translations, but if the character Moses was in Kemet, and it was a common name like Bob, Bill, or like my name, Steve. It's a very common name, so a lot of people had that name. It wasn't just to one person. Your nickname was Mosi. So I doubt very seriously if that name actually meant what a lot of people say it meant in terms of the biblical sense of the word. I'm pretty sure it meant where it originated from, which is in Kemet or in ancient Egypt, which meant born of the happy river or born of the Nile River. Or, like I say, I'm born, this is my place of my nativity, Mosi. It also could have been another name for the actual river. As opposed to the Nile River and the Happy River, another name it could have been was Mosi, the Mosi. Since they are almost synonymous, but one was basically referring to a person, and the other one is referring to something else. So that's just a little bit of trivia there for anybody who's interested in that. And so I'm just basically now putting in some symbols of meta-nature. And that's what the hieroglyphics is called. Of course, hieroglyphics, glyph, you can see the word, it means word or image. And so it wasn't called hieroglyphics in the ancient days. It was called medu-nature. And basically what that means is the words of nature. Medu mean words. Nature, you can even see that it comes down from the Kemet II language to the Greek language, which the Ptolemaic Greeks came into Kemet, took over, became the kings eventually, and adopted some of the language into their language. So the word nature comes from Greek, which comes from Latin, and then eventually to English. Nature. And it comes from the word nature. And so basically nature, the words of nature, and words were very important to the ancient Kemet person. They believed words was power. Kind of like we do, like say, for example, certain kind of evangelicals and things like that. You believe the word is power. So therefore, that concept did not originate with Christianity. If you was to study it, you'll find out that concept actually originated in ancient Egypt. And the evidence of it is all of this hieroglyphics or meta-nature written on the walls of Kemet. They put words everywhere because the words meant something. They actually meant something very important. So it was very important it was very important not to lie on somebody because words were very important. And they didn't have documents that you signed to prove honesty. If you said something, you meant it and you lived by it. That was the ancient way of doing things. So your word was your bond. We get a saying like that comes down from the ancient days. So medu-nature, spelled M-E-D-W, but which we pronounce like a U. So M-E-D-U. But actually, for some reason, they give it a modern alphabet phonic of W, but it's pronounced like a U. And it's probably that the original translators were influenced by Greek and influenced by Latin and other languages other than English. Perhaps they were German, in fact, they were French and things like that. So that could be the reason why it translates to W for an English speaker, which I am an English speaker. Okay, so I'm just adding in some hieroglyphics here. And down here, what I'm painting is something called a cartouche. And a cartouche is basically it's supposed to be like a lasso, but it's basically an oval, a capsule shape thing that contained the name of a king. So anytime you see a cartouche, and the way they got the name cartouche is when the French came, they had their gunpowder in these little sacks. And the little gunpowder shot balls was in there, and the little sacks was the shape of the cartouche, or the shapes of the certain hieroglyphics with the king's names. So since some of the French were the first Egyptologists, or the first people to start documenting information about Kemet, whereas Western people with the Western education, which I have because I'm American, so I have no choice but to have, I speak a Western language, so everything is translated through the lens of English. So the first person who did that was probably French. And as Napoleon Bonaparte shot off the nose of the Sphinx. So various Christians at various times were known to go into, and I'm going to say perhaps Europeans, and for some reason they were offended by the big broad nose on some of the images they saw in Egypt. It looked like an African person's nose. So they just shot it off, or chiseled it off, or took it off the best way they could. I'm just saying suppose, because it seems like a little bit more than a coincidence that they always attack the nose or certain features that don't look exactly like the way they think it should look. So anyway, they shot the whole front face off the Sphinx, and basically the Sphinx is a female face because a ancient king actually resculpted the Sphinx. I think it originally was a lion, and then he resculpted it after his mother. And that's the story behind that. And so it was a woman's face, and it was a African-looking woman's nose and whatnot. And there is your Sphinx type of imagery there. So what I'm doing now is, this is the cartouche, and this is the cartouche of a king. And this little circle here that I'm painting on here, that's Ra. So you can see that this is Ramesses, because this is Ursa Ma'at. This is the nature of Ma'at, which basically is the justice. Like we had the scales of justice as a woman with a blindfold on. Same thing, it comes down from Kemet. So it's Ursa Ma'at Ra Te Sepet Ra inside of this cartouche. So that's how we know this is the king that they're talking about here in this particular temple that was built. And Ramesses had a lot of temples, had a lot of structures built. He was basically a builder king. He just built a lot of stuff. A lot of other kings built stuff, but he seemed to build a tremendous amount, more so than some other kings. And then there's some kings of Kemet that didn't build anything, during their reign. And just nothing got built. They just weren't, maybe they didn't have the talent in their kingdom at the time the same way. Or maybe that this wasn't as important for them to get that financed, or whatever needed to happen, because obviously people have to eat in order to do the work. So somebody's got to spend money, and they had a trade system going on. You notice that you don't see any coins with the Kemet kings on it. You only see coins when the warlords came in. And when the warlords came in, what they did was they were basically paid by the Kemet people to fight the enemies of the people of Kemet. Now, a lot of times people, you look at the dog, the man with the dog head. They say, oh, that's a god, because the ancient Kemet people didn't have any. They didn't call it God. They call it nature, which is nature, element of nature, or element of existence. That's another way to look at it. That might be a better definition than element of nature. So, and basically all they're doing is science. They're describing the world around them. When they describe element of nature of justice, what does justice have to do with nature? Well, it's on a woman, so it's on a human body. So that means this is something that pertains to man. Now, if it's just an animal, just as an animal, that pertains to everything, the universe, everything, the world. But if it's on a man's head, that means that this is a symbol, because they were African people. So when you saw, for example, the egret, and he's studying the water, and he's looking for fish, but he's just intensely studying that water. He's just looking. Okay, what else? And it's an egret head or the bird with the little beak, and he's looking into the water on a man's body. So what a man does that look like an egret to an ancient African. He's in Africa, and he sees these animals all the time doing this. And this is when languages get developed. This is how it actually probably got developed. He says, okay, a student does that. A student sits there and studies his little work, his little piece of paper. He studies whatever, like I'm studying this painting. He's just focused, just like this egret. So that the average person who could have been illiterate, they may have, and it was easier for them to read the meta nature in picture form than in a cursive symbolistic form, because the kings probably could read the cursive form of the meta nature, but the average person could read the pictorial form that you see out in public all over Kemet. Those were the forms of the language that the average person could easily see. So he knew you were talking about Maya. He knew you were talking about Dahut, not Tahuti, not Tut, but Dahut. And basically that meant a person who studies, a person who thinks, a scholar. That's who you were referring to, somebody who is a scholar or somebody who's very educated. Daut. And that's where the word thought comes from. You can hear it coming down from Greek to Latin to English, thought. And actually, what happened when the Greeks came in, they couldn't say Dahut, because that's basically spelled D-J-H-U-T-I, Daut. Okay, they couldn't say that. So they said, they more or less a TH sound, thought. That's what they said. So since they were the new conquerors and they were the new kings, and a king can't be wrong, it was no longer Daut, it was thought. And today we say thought because the people who came in learned from the Rosetta Stone and other translations that went into Greek. So they were basically translating the meta nature through a Greek lens. And unfortunately, it was with Greek pronunciations as well. And with sometimes Greeks misunderstood what the original African people had in terms of what the meta nature was saying, what the translations of the words were. And you got a little bit of Greek, and then even you got a little bit of you can see a little bit of the Christian ideas kind of come through more, or the Abrahamic ideas, I should say. Because there was no Christian ideas at that juncture in time at about 1600 AD to about 350 AD. BC. 1600 BC to 350 BC, there was no real Christian ideas. There might have been Abrahamic type of ideas in the region. It was coming in from outside. It was coming from outside of Egypt. It was influencing. So Egypt was influencing other places. Ancient Kemet was influencing other places, and other places was influencing ancient Kemet. All of this was going on as people were exchanging and trading. Again, when they had to hire the mercenaries with the coins, they basically put the face of the warlord on the coin. It says, okay, you work for this guy. He's our guy. And we're going to give you a gold coin with his image on it. And we're going to give you the gold. And this warlord would just put his image on it. So if you wanted to get some of that, you had to basically work for him. And then what happened was, if the Persians, actually it wasn't Persians at that time, it was Arcadians. If the Arcadians was going to come and attack and loot, or the people of the Levant, the Hyksos, was to come and loot, go kill these guys for us. Because we're too divine, we're too pious. And they were very, very spiritual people. They were very, very religious people. They were very pious. They were very dignified people. You can tell by the way they dressed, the way they posed. They were very, very, they were people of conviction. Let's put it that way. And they had very strict ideas about themselves and how to keep themselves purified and things like that. You can see they're always cleaning. They always have incense and flavors. You know, they're smelling the lotus and various flowers that grew along the Nile. So they were very much into purification and things like that. They had pretty decent, okay hygiene, you know. And of course, they was into perfumes. All of that stuff was developed in Kemet. And to make a long story short, essentially, this is a cartouche, and this is meta-nature, which we call today hieroglyphics, which is pictured words with phonic sounds to them, which almost every person from the region during the time, just like we can look at a symbol of a McDonald's arc, and we know that you don't have to say that's McDonald's. All you have to do is see that arc, the little golden arch, and you automatically know that's McDonald's. You know everything about it. Nobody has to tell you anything. You don't have to read a whole bunch of stuff. It's a symbol. Same thing, if you see an apple with a bite out of it, you know that's Apple Computer. Nobody has to explain to you this is a computer company and it was started by Steve Jobs back in 1970, whatever. All you need to know is Apple Computer, that's what it is, and everything else, you see that little symbol, that's kind of like what this is. But they didn't have the sophisticated kind of geographic things we had. Again, they had animals from Africa, and that was what the average person was most familiar with. They were most familiar with the animals and how they would deal. I mean, everything, even they pulled their carts by animals. Animals did a lot, and animals provided fertilizer for their crops, food. So animals were very important. And most people had knowledge of animals because they were very important. So animals begin to be symbolic, For example, in the desert area, if there was a cobra, for example, that was a type of snake that was, native to the area, and definitely native to certain areas of Africa and Western Asia, I should say. And it was very venomous. And it would kind of rear up and kind of give you a warning, kind of flare its little neck area and kind of give you a warning, hey, chill out. You better back off because you're kind of violating my space. You're kind of violating something. So the king would have that in his uraeus. He would have a cobra there. You would see that. And that basically was a symbol that, hey, this is some authority here. You better stop and pay attention. And that's basically what it meant. This is very important. When you see this animal, you better chill out whatever you're doing and pay attention. So, you didn't have to have a dictionary to understand what that meant. If you saw that sitting on somebody's head, you understood what a cobra was, and you understood he's got one on his head. I better pay attention to this dude. He looks like somebody important. So it became the symbol of the king. And of course, the king was called a Nasut Biti. He was not called Pharaoh. I know in the Bible, they tell you the king was called Pharaoh. Well, that's the conqueror who wrote that. The guy who killed the ancient Egyptian people, well, it wasn't the original person who came in and genocided them. They were the actual Akkadians, who later became known as the Persians. It seems like people kept reinventing themselves. The same group of people. But first you're Akkadians, and then you become Persians. I guess it depends on whichever king does the conquering, and he just say, okay, that king, he was the Persian king, and now he was the Akkadian king, and now I'm the Persian king. But the core group of people, in terms of the ethnos, or the ethnicity of the people, was the same. The general language influences were the same. So, one could conclude that a lot of times, according to whichever king had the authority, who was in charge, people's names start changing, but it was the same people with the same kind of manners. And maybe it was still cousins to the other king, but it was just a different guy. He just had to have a different name because that's what my great uncle did, or my cousin did, or something like that. And I'm a whole different family of dudes. And this is the way I'm going to run this thing. And this is my lineage and my legacy is going to rule the earth from now on. So you did have a little bit of that going on in the ancient days. And for that reason, they had to get their titles in. Their titles was extremely important to them because that's how they kept people at bay. People paid tribute to them because it says, okay, I don't want to have none of this guy. He jacked up this other king over here pretty bad, so let's just pay the tribute and just be done with it. We don't want to have to go to battle with the fellow. We want to make some kind of truce or peace with him. We're going to get along, or we're going to just join his kingdom. We're going to be a sub-king underneath that king. And that's where the term King of Kings came from. But anyway, when you saw the cobra in the uraeus, that was a symbol of authority, meaning you got to pay attention to me. And when you saw the vulture is something that, well, we know the vulture today is something that basically preys on dead things. But in the ancient days, they had a better knowledge of animals. And the vulture to them was actually something more or less like that could survive in any situation. It was thought, now I don't know how true this is, that a vulture could, even if there was only a female vulture, somehow a vulture could self-impregnate and make more vultures, even though it was only one vulture. And in a desert situation where you might get a desert storm come through and it's really bad and a lot of stuff gets killed off, and or maybe there's famine and the thing can barely survive, and this is a vulture is a survivor. Basically, that's what it translates into. A vulture is something that no matter what you throw at it, it will eat anything. Literally, it doesn't just eat dead things. It eats a lot of stuff, but it prefers certain things. But it also cleans up the destruction, the death. It goes in, instead of letting something sit there and decay, it will go ahead and just straighten it on out for you, you know? So they had a little bit of a different understanding of what a vulture was. It was a very, very resourceful animal that could basically get stuff done and survive in the most harshest scenario. So again, a king was somebody who, no matter what hardships the people had to deal with, and that's why it became a symbol in his crown, in his uraeus, no matter what this vulture, and it was a female vulture, by the way, because she has the art of reproduction, something that the man does not have, the male does not have. It can initiate, but this particular vulture was believed to be able to self-initiate, which is a very powerful thing. So perhaps the vulture was male, perhaps the vulture was also female, but it could reproduce itself. And it's seemingly in almost impossible situations, and probably most likely what was going on was the vulture was flying vast distances, which they can do, finding a male to impregnate them, and then going and living, say, vast distance somewhere else and raising the chicks away from the male. But again, it seemed like this vulture had the ability to do that. And so people of the ancient day gave this majestic powers because this thing seemed like it was doing something. The same thing with the beetle. The way the story of the beetle, how it actually impregnates its eggs inside of it gets a piece of dung off the Nile River and mud, and it makes a little ball, and it basically burrows into the center of the ball, lays its eggs, then it comes out. And then these little balls are sitting around, and then many little time later, the little baby beetles come out. And again, this was the cycle of life. Something goes into a tomb, so to speak. In this case, the tomb looks like a ball. And the old one goes in the tomb, but what comes out of it is a bunch of little babies. So what they're talking about is something that was very important to the ancient person. Even though grandpa and grandma and uncle, cousin, whoever died, the children is the future. They've been taught. They've been raised by the elders. And out of the womb, which is the little circular sphere that the little baby beetles come out of, is symbolic of the womb. It's also symbolic of the tomb. The tomb is symbolic of the womb. And then there's rebirth. So That is called Keper Ra or Kep Ra. You know, basically Ra in the morning, the dawn. And we call it morning, but it's really the opposite of, it kind of sounds like the word morning, like when you're sad at a death. But actually, the morning is the dawn. On the Haru, this person was not called Horus, that's the Greek word. He was called Haru in the Kemet language. And she was not called Hathor, that's the Greek word. She was called Hat Haru, which got, and there might have been like a R or on the end. But she was called Hat Haru. And of course, when the Greeks came in, they couldn't say Hat Haru. For some reason, they said Hathor. And that's what we do, because that's how the people who, the original, the first people who started doing Egyptology, that's how they translated it. But that's actually not the correct way to say their ancient names. So just a little bit of history there. As I'm kind of painting some of this meta-nature, just a little bit of history to kind of get you updated on what meta-nature is, what hieroglyphics actually is, and what hieroglyphic actually is not, you know? Because a lot of times people do have their opinion on what it is, and it ain't necessarily what they think it is. So I like to always set records straight somewhat, you know? And like I said, I'm a bit of a historian. I like history. And it's very important to get history right, I think, because it's in respect of the ancient Kemet people, like I say, they've been given a bad rep when they were very, very pious people. And I believe they were religious before other cultures. I mean, you can see burials. And if you go to, say, for example, Europe, you don't hardly see any burials until like the Greek times. I mean, you go back about 4000 BC, no burials. So the concept of afterlife that we have like now, I guess in the Abrahamic or the Christian, must have come from Kemet because of the fact that they were burying. So if you're burying somebody, there must have been a religion or some type of, there was a ceremony. There must have been some type of rituals or some type of ideas that go along with these elaborate funerals that they had. I mean, where if there's no burials, I mean, they say it was cremation going on, but there's more evidence there was no cremation, that there was just people just, wherever they died is where they died. And over time, stuff just simply wore away and disappeared. So there you have it. You have, and I think it was very important for the ancient Kemet people to actually put this. These are little time capsules. The words here can be translated. I mean, with a little work, but I guess they didn't want to insult our intelligence. They knew that somebody would be able to do some translating on this. And perhaps they thought their language would exist forever. But one way to guarantee that your language exists is to carve it in stone. And I tell people this, the laws of Ma'at. I think I read it in the Saqqara pyramid, spelled Sakkara or something like that. Saqqara pyramid, and it has basically the 10 Commandments is the laws of Ma'at, the 44 laws of Ma'at. Of course, it's 10 commandments, but they took 10 of them and emphasized those. However, there was a lot more commandments than that, and they're carved in granite, not just in limestone and granite. And the only difference is standard being a command saying, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not blah, blah, blah. It says, I have not. It's a confession. It's almost word for word. And it is carved. It's not a tablet like the Moses character. And notice that Moses was named after a Kemet name. It was not named after a Aramaic name or a Jewish name or Akkadian name or Persian name or a Greek name. Mostly come out of the Kemet name. So I'm thinking that they had these laws in Kemet long before any person like Moses might have come into Kemet and so-called taught them certain laws. I'm thinking, especially if Moses, I believe it's in Genesis somewhere, it says he was educated in everything from Egypt, which meant he must have learned the laws of Maya, because Maya is a nature, and the education system started out person started out at 7 years old, and they finished at 47. So if he was educated, that meant when Moses actually killed somebody and got exiled out of Kemet, he must have been over 47 years old when he did that, because his education would have been complete if he was educated in everything from Egypt, which meant he had to actually give libations like this character is to the Necharu, the various elements of nature from Kemet, which is basically Maya is one of them. So that's probably where the Ten Commandments come from. And they're in the Saqqara pyramid. You can kind of Google that, study that for yourself. In the Saqqara pyramid, the Ten Commandments. You can Google that and figure something out about that. But and it's written in hieroglyphics. Where you say, well, how do they get the translation? Well, in Egypt today, there's a language called Coptic, or a group of people called Coptic people, who speak a type of version of the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Meta-Neter. Also in Ethiopia is another language called Amharic, that is another version of the ancient Egyptian language. Much like Latin that the Romans spoke, there's also Spanish, there's also Italian, there's also Romanian, and there's also to a certain part French. As other cultures are introduced into the region, you get various versions of the original Latin language. It's not the same Latin that the Romans spoke, but it's very akin to that. And from that language, you can kind of backwards engineer the original language and kind of get a basic idea. And you can see doctors and educated people in the old days, you had to learn Latin and Greek to basically be considered an educated person. When I say the old days, I'm talking about the old days in America. Nowadays, you can go and get a PhD and don't learn one Latin language. I think. But you can at least get a master's and don't have to. You can get a bachelor's and definitely you don't have to with that. So there's a lot of changes that's happening in the education system just in recent times. But why was it important to know Latin? Why was that so important? Because that's how you knew Greek. And that's how you knew, and you had some idea when you saw the ruins of Rome, you saw the ruins of Greek, and that's in Europe, you can kind of get a real good idea of what they were actually driving at. People wanted to know. People were curious. So the same thing with a civilization before the Greeks called the Kemet people. What you needed for that was a group of people that really didn't exist as a people anymore. They existed as a hodgepodge of cultures that came in. And other languages got kind of fused in with them and synthesized in, other influences and cultures, but you can still get definitions because there's enough of the language left for you to kind of suppose what they were talking about, especially you got some picture clues involved to kind of help out. So this is how scholars were able to kind of piece together the ancient Kemet language by going back to Amharic and the Coptic languages and noticing similarities in the languages. And then from noticing these similarities in the language, they actually were able to actually get a better translation than what you get from stuff like the Rosetta Stone, which is most or less, like so many barleys of wheat, so many, but it was more like just, accounting. They really weren't discussing the religious system or the priest system or the king, the nobles concepts. They're more or less discussing, like so many barleys of wheat, so many barleys of this. They're kind of discussing those kind of things and that. So if you want to get more of a of a involved to know what to say, for example, what the Netaru is doing, you would have to know okay, what is this funny looking thing right here with the head of a bird and, the body of a man on it? I mean, what does that mean? What in the world are they coming from with that? Well, you got to know what the priest is thinking about. And you're not going to get that from just being able to translate so many barleys of wheat and so many barleys of this. You're going to really have to get some definitions there that's relevant to what you're looking into, So that's when you can go to these other languages, and they will kind of have words that say, for example, in English, we don't say like what James or what Captain John Smith and George Washington, whither thou goeth, whither thou stayeth, Elizabethan English. English has evolved itself. Just if you're an English speaker, the English that they spoke when they started the USA, we're not going to go to any other countries. We can stay right here in the USA. The English that they spoke then is different from the English we speak now. We don't say 7 years ago like Abraham Lincoln. Even during Abraham Lincoln in 18-something, we just don't speak that way anymore. President Trump doesn't get on television and say 80 and so many days ago we did this. Or this guy did that. It just don't happen. So for that reason, we don't. So you can imagine if this happened in just 100, 150 years, you can only imagine what happened in 1,000, 2,000, 4,000 years. Stuff gets lost in translation. I mean, just languages evolve just like people. People are very organic in the way they go about things and the way they do things. They're very, very organic about that. And language forms and develops very organically as well. Basically, like I say, even like, for example, the influence of, say, R&B culture. I'm going to just say that. A lot of people don't think R&B culture had an influence on America, but I remember back in the day, and I'm not going to try to date myself, when some people didn't say yo, like we say yo, what's up? They didn't say what's up either. It just wasn't said until about 1970s, late 1970s, something like that. In the 1970s, people started talking more like that. And a lot of people made fun and said, hey, how come you guys say yo all the time? Certain cultural African American people use that term. It was kind of introducing that term to others. So you can see that a certain group is having an influence on another group. And that was the standard English. Yo was not standard English. That was considered bad English. And now today it's common. Everybody says it. Even if you go to another country, a guy may say, yo, what's up? I've seen that. It was somebody from Europe. I think it was from Eastern Europe. And they saw a black guy. It wasn't me. It was another black guy. I guess I didn't look black enough for him. And he was really startled to see this black guy. So he wanted to let him know he liked hip hop, see? Because he was following some of that. So he goes, yo, what's up? God looks at him like, what the world? I'm not expecting that, that kind of thing, But anyway, it's just very interesting when you're around when that term first came up. And of course, if the same guy would have met an Anglo-American, for example, he probably wouldn't have addressed the American that way. But when he sees an African American, he addressed the American that way. See? So you can see how one particular ethnic group comes in and influences a language, changes it. And the language is forever changed because it's embraced by other people that have nothing to do with that original group that came in. Actually, it has almost nothing to do with it. So it's very interesting when you see that, because what it does is it tells you how languages evolve. It's a good illustration of how the ancient Egyptian language evolved into various languages which exist today that we might not even associate necessarily with the ancient Egyptians. Well, some people would not associate with the ancient Egyptian cultures. Some people just wouldn't. They just don't want to make that association for whatever reason. But you can't help to, but through a little investigation, you can kind of see that, in fact, this group right here does kind of hold the tradition of that language together. So there's something to be learned by studying the language of this group over here, which has certain things in common, certain words in common with that original language. And of course, especially if they're still in the region, like still in Sudan. And you got to remember, it wasn't until the colonizing of Africa before those areas even had borders. Before they would even say, okay, this is our country borders. It just was not something that was done until certain people that really wanted to say, well, this belongs to England, this belongs to France, this belongs to Italy. They came in and they said, okay, now this is your border. You're the king of that. You're going to give us ability to trade and deal in here. Or we're taking this because we are conquerors and we're going to start operating this way in this border, and it's going to be called this from now on, and this is our territory because we came in and colonized, However way you want to look at that, you can see how borders got introduced to the area through the conquest of others. But in the ancient days, there was no such borders. You would have a little area that you go to. Nub means gold. Nubian does not mean black. Doesn't mean black people. It simply means gold. Nub. So Nubian means the place of gold. So when the Greeks came there, they were definitely interested in getting to some of that gold. They wanted to get to the money now. So gold is money. So the bottom line here is that Nubia became very important because it wasn't the northern part that had the gold. It was the southern part. And it's hot down there. And the Greeks were basically from Europe. It was not as hot in some areas of Greece, but that's where the gold is, so we got to get down there and deal with that. So there was a little bit of Nubian knowledge going down. And then eventually they did get down there a little bit. And there was and Nubian was able to kind of hold them off for a little spell. Because not forever. And of course, what happened with the Africans is they got pushed further south into areas of Uganda and Ethiopia and Sudan, where it's just the people looking for all that stuff, looking for the resources, they just wouldn't go there. And then they stopped. They said, okay, we're not being persecuted in this area here, so let's just make our living here from now on. Even though we built all these antiquities further up north, that's a bad land for us right now. We get in trouble there. We get killed and genocided. It might not be the healthiest place to stay. And there's another group of people in charge there, and we're going to have our little thing going on down here. So people simply just moved south. And that's what happened. And because they dressed is similar. It's a similar, even today, you can see the way this character is dressed, the way they dressed in ancient Kemet is an African style. It's not necessarily an Asian style or European style of dress. But they said, well, they probably dressed different in Europe, in Asia back then, in different places. Well, yes, so, but they actually made statues in those countries too, and images, and you just don't see it there. But you do see statues in Africa, in antiquity and somewhat more modern, that still echo that. So one can conclude that the style was basically of an African flavor or African way of seeing the way he should dress himself. And you can see if you go to Africa now, they like the bright clothes, with a lot of like pictorial action going on. Even if it's just a tapestry of the design, that piercing red color, that piercing, those sharp, strong colors, it's all over, not just Eastern Africa, but also Western Africa. And then when you see people like with the way the monks dress and the nuns dress, you can see this is a very dark black, or it's just white. They're wearing a lot of like a more pure, puritanical type of clothing. It's a different mentality. It's a whole different way of looking at things. And so you can see that in the dress of the Greeks. For example, in Greece. I'm not talking about the Greeks that were in Kemet. I'm talking about the Greeks that were in Greece. It's a little bit more like a drape, a little bit less colors and tapestry and piercing graphics in the clothing. It just was not a light for that particular flair. So you can see it was a different cultural influence. It was a different type of mind that was creating the look. It's a different type of mind that was creating those looks. And you know, a person who's an artist, you could probably see that easier than a person who's not, who's like more of a political thinker. Oh no, but they were this. See, that's a political thinker. But if you look at it from a art standpoint in terms of this is what the people made, I mean, it's kind of like music. I mean, if you're from Tennessee, it's a strong chance that you might like country music. I mean, you might not like it. Whereas if you're from New York, there's a strong chance you might like hip hop. Again, you might not like it. You might like country music if you're from New York. However, it's a much stronger. If I was a betting man, I would put my money on the fact that if you're from New York, you might, especially if you're African American from New York, you might, you know, like hip hop, or at least tolerate it. But if you're from Nashville, Tennessee, for example, I would say there's a strong chance that you're a connoisseur of country music, or what we call country music today. And you know, it wouldn't be really saying anything wrong because you're really saying something that's based on factual things. Likewise, if there's a certain kind of clothing that people like to wear, again, if you go to New York fashion area, you're going to see the clothing stores have a different kind of apparel in different regions of the country. I remember when I was living in New York and I was saying, people said, where you get that outfit from, man? I really like that jacket. We couldn't find anything like that in Virginia. And I was saying, yeah, I get this from a place in New York. And say, hey, the next time you go up there, can you get an extra one and bring one down for me? Because you just couldn't find that in other regions where the people who was making the selection for clothes didn't think that kind of style was attractive or didn't think it would sell. Therefore, they just didn't carry it. And it wasn't until maybe the hip-hop look started getting real big and certain people started buying things. And then all of a sudden, these groups started carrying it. These different clothing stores would actually start carrying these things. And it's very interesting to see that. It's like, okay, well, you know, you know, it's like, it's whatever the dominant culture is doing. That's what the flavor of the people are. And this is the dominant culture. So the dominant culture is wearing clothes like this in Kemet, which is to me of an African mindset. Because you can see the Africanism. Even the tails that, our costume had tails on the back. And you can see that that kind of thing is all through Africa. If you look at the Zulus and the Swazis down in South Africa, you'll see these kind of images and the flares on the end and the girdles and the no shirt look. I mean, if you go to the average, and especially the hot time season and the average hood, a lot of guys ain't got no shirt on. Then again, you can go to the average place in rural America where it's white, and it's hot. especially in the South, a lot of guys ain't got a shirt on. So it's hot in Kemet. But at the same time, it's you still gonna find certain people they're gonna put that shirt on, because even if it's hot, they just don't feel comfortable without a shirt on. So it is a certain way of seeing things, of a certain cultural way of appreciating the way someone dress, you know. So you can kind of see things kind of work. It slowly, the culture of Kemet was dominant after the Ptolemaic kings came in. But you can see slowly the culture starts switching to more of a Greek or Roman, Greco-Roman type of look. Because you can see then the people started looking mixed. You know, I'm a lighter complexion African-American person. I am mixed. And so, but one thing about being a person of mixed ancestry, or seeing different complexions and looks in your family, I can look at the people of ancient Kemet and I can see exactly how that happened, because it happens in my family. You know, when you get African and white and Native American mixed together, you get some interesting looks. And you start seeing that in Kemet as well. So even when things start getting kind of Roman-esque, I should say, I'm going to just say it that way, or Greco-Roman-esque, you still could see there was some blending going on. And it was probably consensual blending by that point. I mean, the people have become one. For example, I'll give another example. I know that there's a group of people in America called, today I think they're called Hispanic. But before Christopher Columbus, let's say before around 1300, there was no group of people in the United States or anywhere in the world called Hispanic. There was a group of people that was mixed. And somebody had to say, okay, they're not from Europe, but they're not Native American either, but they're not African. So what are they? They got their own look, and there's a lot of them. There's a lot of mixed people here. It's a boatload of mixed people. What are we going to call these people? And then somebody start calling them Hispanic. Same thing. There's no such a thing as black people. I mean, black is a color. So why are we calling people black? I mean, it's not an ethnicity. It's not a nation. It's not even a region that people come from. You're describing the way a person looks. Somebody else is giving you a title or a name based on an impression they have of you. And so there was no such a group of people called Latin either, because Latin people are basically people from Rome. Romans were Latins, and then Latins kind of died out during the Gothic age. So where does the Latino come from? Well, you originally came from Spain, perhaps. Well, did you? Or were you not, like always here as a Native American? Or at least part of you. And I would argue that case. I would guarantee you that part of you probably did come from Native Americans. But then there's part of you that did come from Spain. But how much of that is actually Latin? How much of that is actually Germanic mixed with maybe some Latins, maybe mixed with some Moors, some Africans, maybe mixed with a little bit of everything that happened, because people are constantly migrating and blending. So this same thing was happening during the time of Kemet, especially in the later kingdoms when there was more trade going on. There was more stuff being exchanged in terms of ideas and people. You started getting influences backwards and forwards between cultures. Some cultures had a dominant influence. Some cultures had more of a passive or a more secondary influence. It's not so obvious, but there is an influence. And then some cultures just simply asserted their culture over top the other one and just completely tried to erase the other culture. But in most cases, that didn't happen. In most cases, people were trying to coexist to some level. One was probably dominating, but they were allowing some of the other people to kind of still exist amongst them. And this happened in Kemet, but this happened more peacefully at first. And then I think what happened, it started to get a little bit more aggressive after the controlling group saw themselves losing control. That usually happens. I mean, you could almost say that that's happening in the U.S. right now. You have suddenly all of these Hispanic people in the country. And then there was a group of people that was dominating the scene, mostly from England and Northern Europe. And now all of a sudden they find themselves not dominating the scene as much. They have to share it a little bit with others, a little bit more. And they don't necessarily want to give it up. So anyway, you get new names like Hispanic that just come from nowhere. You just give it to them, or Latino. You just give them the title because, and then the person have to sign off. The group of people have to sign off. They have to think positive of the title, the new name you give for them. So it has to be complimentary, something that they appreciate, and they embrace it. And then all of a sudden, you give them the name of Latino or Hispanic. And in reality, they may be just a mix of European, Native American, and African. Probably in that order. Depending, on which island, place, or region you're from. And the same thing happened in Kemet. You had the Persians come in, and they kind of mixed with the people that was there. Then, of course, you had the Greeks come in, and they're kind of mixing with the people that come in. Or I should say the Macedonians. Because they were only Greek after they dominated and took over Persia. Then they slowly changed their identity to Greek. But before that, they were actually Macedonians. So again, people are constantly, the same group of people are the people who have created the ethnicities that created the new group became eventually the Greeks. But before that, they were Macedonians. And who knows what they were before they were even Macedonians. It's probably some group coming from the Germanic people or the Scythian people, the Scythians. Scythian. That was a group of people who existed along with the Syrians during the time of the Assyrians and the Babylonians during that era. And they were further north, like around Ukraine. But going toward eastern, going more like West Asia, but the more easterner section of West Asia. Northeasterner. Going towards perhaps even like Russia. And they were interfacing with the Arcadians as well. And it was not necessarily peaceful all the time. There was wars between those groups. As one group wanted to marry into the other group, and the other group won't having it. And of course, eventually they kept fighting and fighting until one side just kind of started dominating the other one more and more. And that seemed to be the way of the ancient days. So that's what you had in Kemet. You had a whole lot of new people coming in, conquest coming in, and eventually you had the usurping of the original kingship and replaced with perhaps even a foreign kingship. And that's what happened in the case of when the Persians actually were the ones that really destroyed Kemet. It was really the Persians in about 750 BC. And actually, I shouldn't say that, it was Arcadians. And with the help of a civil war broke out basically in Kemet, whereas the king was betrayed by his own people. So that's usually how it starts, with one group wants power, the other group said, no, you can't get power, or the people who's in power. So they weaken themselves. And then another group that's always been there seizes the occasion to kind of take advantage. And so there was, and they might have been having more ties with the Arcadians than they had better ties with Kemet. Or Kemet was in charge enough, and they would say, okay, let's get a change of guard. or we'll benefit more if this person wins than this other one, or we don't like this particular king as much as we like, say, the previous king of Kemet. Whatever the case was, they sided with the Arcadians. The people of the Hyksos, the people of the Levant, sided with the Arcadians. And what they did was destroy Kemet. They totally genocided everybody, all of the, especially the aristocratic, the noble people. And they chased all of the regular people out of Kemet, and they went all over Africa. And of course you have the poor, you have not the aristocratic class, because the aristocratic class stayed to defend all of their stuff, all of their riches, all of their buildings, all they had for thousands of years. They weren't going to give that up. And so they basically fought until they won't no more. And then the more humble people, who weren't probably soldiers at all, but probably was mothers and children and grandpas and grandmas and whatnot, they ran down into Uganda, Ethiopia, Sudan, Tanzania, through those areas, perhaps even as far as places like Kenya, perhaps even over into the Arabian Peninsula, to get away, from the persecution. And it probably was, back then it was brutal, You went in, you jacked everybody up, and you didn't have that much mercy on anybody. Nobody was trying to be humanitarian back then. They were basically trying to be conquerors. So, and you can read in the Bible all about the conquering idea, so you know that there was some conquering going on, even if you was a biblical fellow. There were, you had some people that was, basically going in and just destroying everything, the chickens, the buzzards, everything. They was destroying everything, the chickens, the roosters, the cows, the king, everything out the land had to be genocided. So even in the Bible, that was the way to go. You essentially genocided everything until wasn't nothing left but you in there. And of course, it's much easier to rule that way when you basically destroyed all the enemy. You don't have anybody to contend with. You don't have anybody to have to negotiate with. It's just you and your guys, and y'all doing your thing, So that is how language probably got destroyed. But there are some fragments of the Coptic language. The Coptic language still has some fragments of meta-nature. Well, it doesn't have fragments. It is meta-nature. It's the modern version of it that still survives. And even though we don't identify with that, because what happened was Christianity came in and usurped the Netaru, the way of the Netaru, or the way of the original Kemetic people. Christianity basically, the Coptic religion, or the Christos religion, and this is during the time of the Romans. Basically, the religion went through a lot of evolutions, and I'm pretty sure that's where the Abrahamic traditions kind of came in, and for a while that prevailed. And then a group of people kind of got that, and so, okay, well, we the Greeks, we don't really want that, so what are we going to do? We're Romans. We don't need that, because these people was here first, and they kind of got the Abrahamic stuff. So what happened was they invented the Christian thing. So they still did the same thing, but it's for them. Of course, the people that were there all the time, they got the Abrahamic version. Because they were, mixed people or Caucasian people who was there before these other groups were there. And so even though they had some similar culture, they kind of kept portions of the status quo propaganda history that the previous group had, but they just revised it a little bit to include certain things from their culture. Like, okay, now what we can do is we can actually eat pigs and things like that, because we eat that in Rome, it's okay to eat that in Rome, but of course we're here now in the Levant, and we're here in Kemet, And so these people don't like to eat that, but so we're going to have to change some of these rules because we ain't going to give up on the bacon. Just like that, you know. So kind of that mentality, sort of. I'm not going to say that was it, but of course I'm adding a little comedy in there. But it's something along that line. Okay, so what I'm doing now is just kind of going away and hitting a nice fresh coat of paint on the actual body of this, of the king figure of Haru. Just trying to get another little, just to put some touches on this. And that's what I do. I just go in and I just do little touches here and there. As I go, you know, just a little bit here, a little bit there. Until it kind of takes on the character that I'm looking for. Until the image starts taking on that particular, the language and the brush strokes. The language and the way the colors are applied, juxtaposition to each other. You know, that's kind of what I'm looking for. So, and I'm using a soft hair number 8 round brush, sable. And you kind of just put in some of this modeling here. And I want to put it in kind of soft. I don't want it to be too hard, but I don't want it to be too, I don't want it to be too soft either. So I want it to be just in the middle. You know, like the golden locks and the 3 bears. You know, and this one is just right. Just kind of want it to be sort of like that. Soften up a couple of lines here and there. And what I do is I just switch up the brush strokes some. So now I don't like all of the brush strokes going in the same direction. I mean, I think in some of my older paintings, I was painting more like that. Trying to move away from some of that. Oops, and that's too light. Sometimes you have a tendency to do that. Let me just put some of this down here then. And see what I'm doing now is I'm painting basically wet into tacky. It's almost dry, but not quite dry. And I like to paint this way quite a bit. And that's why I mix my, when you saw me at the beginning of the show today, I mixed my medium that way. Because I'm mixing, I like to paint wet into a slightly tacky dry. I want it dry, but I don't want it completely dry. I kind of want it still workable, but not able to, if I brush into it real hard, I can actually pull it up. But I don't really want to pull it up. So what I've done is I've learned to get a certain kind of stroke or a certain kind of paint that I put down, certain thickness, to kind of get that exactly the way I want it. And this allows me to get a kind of a layering of paint that I kind of like. I just like having layers of paint where you're not seeing one particular paint just drop down. You're seeing a whole bunch of little smaller little islands of paint here and there, kind of glowing underneath some other paint. And I just think that just makes a lot more interesting in terms of just making the paint look better than what a actual print can look. You can get a print or something, and you can just really do a Photoshop kind of job, and you can blend it. You can use your Wacom tablet. You can really get in there and do some really interesting things. However, when you get it printed out, it's going to look flat because you printed it to a G-clay process, or you printed it to something, and it just doesn't look like an actual painting will look. Let me go to the back of the room here and take a gander at what I'm doing. Of course, I need to do some blending here, and that's precisely what I am going to do. I'll do a little blending. And sometimes in order to blend successfully, you have to have something down already on the canvas. I mean, you have to have something wet. So sometimes I go in with another tone and just pop that in where I think it needs it. Then I'll begin to blend that. Of course, you want to make sure that you have the right tone on the brush, because when you paint this way, whatever you have on your brush makes a difference too. Okay, let's see. Okay, hello, Deborah B. Deborah Lewis Branch, what's up? How you doing? Good to see you. I like the painting in your studio. Are they paintings for sale? Yes, they are. All you got to do is inbox me and we negotiate. That's how it works. Thank you, cousin Aretha. Aretha Franklin, Colleen Rowan. How's it going? Empress Kimberly Africa, how you doing? Okay, so basically, essentially what I'm doing now is just kind of just adding some interest to my paint, you know. I have the tones, the basic tones in. Originally, I painted the underpainting in. And now what I want is I don't want to get something that looks like a print. I want to get something that looks like it was painted. It's painting. It has the painting is interesting. The paint itself is interesting. So that's very important. That's very important. And because you want to, as an artist, you're competing with technology. You're competing with Photoshop. You're not just competing with other artists out there. I mean, not to say you're competing, because everybody's art is different, just like everybody's music is different. You know, a country music artist is not competing, for example, with a hip-hop music artist who's not competing necessarily with an R&B artist, who is not competing with a ballad singer, who's not competing with more or less a person who is a jazz player, you know, and they're more instrumental. They all have their merit, you know. I have a large collection of music and a wide range of music. I'm not just a one-dimensional kind of music connoisseur or collector, you know. I like it all. I appreciate them all for different reasons. And likewise, art is the same way. I mean, but the particular shtick that I prescribe to, the particular stuff that I like to do, I know that you can print some things out to G-Clay. And I know that you can work on a Wacom tablet with Photoshop and Procreate and different programs like that. And I know that you can get some really, really nice images. I mean, I've done it myself. However, the printouts just don't look like, they just don't look like what you can do with a paintbrush and paint it. Is in terms of the paint. Are you using oil paint, using quality paints? You're not using something that comes out of a latex inkjet nozzle that's very flat. And at the very best, it's the illusion of a non-flat paint. You're actually working with something that is, how do you say it, that is organic. You know, it's coming from my hand. My hand is actually physically painting this. And my eye and my brain has to translate that color. I'm not allowing Photoshop to say, this is how I'm going to throw down my pixels. This is how my pixel's going to look. Photoshop is not making that determination. And what it is some programmer who's said, this is a brush effect. He's designed your brushes. And he said, this is how you get this kind of look of what a person like me is doing with their brushes. And this is how you fake the funk, so to speak. I'm just going to put it that way. And do that. So your little bag of tricks you learn as a painter, you learn a bag of tricks, you know, on how to make your paint look interesting. Now, what programmers are trying to do is they want to know what your bag of tricks are so they can create a digital version of your bag of tricks that they can sell inside of programs called plugins, inside of programs like Adobe Photoshop and whatnot. So, you know, you want to be aware of that as an artist. You don't want to be a person who is like, okay, that really has nothing to do with me. That's Adobe Photoshop. Matter of fact, I use Adobe Photoshop. It's a great program. What you want to do is when you make these pieces of art, they have to stand for themselves and they have to stand the test of time. Your digital piece is going to exist in cyber world. This is going to exist on a wall somewhere. It's going to hang somewhere completely independent of your cyberspace that you're currently using now, whether that's on YouTube, whether that's on Facebook, whether it's in a gallery website where people can view your work online, or you're sharing your work online, you know, it's somewhere independent of that. And on a wall. And the shadows and the lighting in the gallery is going to have an effect on the way the stuff looks, the position a person stands in, their actual height itself. All of that is going to have a play on your work. It's going to affect the way people experience your work. And you have to be aware of that. So what can you do as a person who is trying to paint in that particular environment? What do you do to make your work different from the guy who's just selling their work online to be in somebody's house, on the wall somewhere, or in somebody's studio somewhere, and then somebody says office? You know, what do you do to distinguish your work? Of course, work like this is not like a girl playing in the meadow, you know, a little girl in the meadow, and she's just laying in the grass and looking out at the horizon. You see that kind of work in places like Target and Walmart. So now, do you want to be a person competing with people that's making art like that? Where your work is competing with somebody who's going to buy something for $19.95, $20.95, maybe $49.95 from Walmart, you know, or Target. You know, can you compete with that kind of distribution service that's getting this all over the place? No. You have to go out and find a person. Then they have to like your work. And then there has to be something different about your work that they can't just buy cheap somewhere else. So it has to be something that's going to invoke the conversation, because that person paid a lot of money. So when people go over to their stately home or to their very, very fine office or wherever kind of place they decide to hang your work and view it, that person has to be complimented, because they did the ultimate compliment. They spent the money to buy your work so you can continue to make more work. It's not so they spent the money so you can just get rich. They spent the money so you can continue to make your work. So in a sense, they're a person who enables you. So, and if you know that you're being enabled by such individuals, you have to make something that give that individual pride in owning your work. That they can say they have this and another person can't get it. You can't get this kind of work from Walmart or somewhere for $49.95 or $29.95. You only can get this from purchasing work from the artist, from his brush. That's how you get that work. So you have to be kind of aware of that to some level. So what I do is I want the paint to have a certain characteristic that you're not going to be able to see in a place like Walmart or Target. You're just not going to be able to see that kind of work there. And it's going to have some what you call impasto, and that's the texture of the brush in the paint. And sometimes that is a heavy relief. I mean, the paint is sitting up perhaps even a 1/4 inch off the canvas. You know, very heavy release. Because why? And that's one of the reasons why a lot of collectors like to buy, or a lot of painters like to make abstract art, because abstract art can be made by computers, but it's a certain intelligence that's from a human only. Only a human can do that. That creates certain kind of art. And so that intelligence should be translated into the painting. Otherwise, it's what I call program art, which is an app like Photoshop, and you did that trick, and then with a couple of steps you can go on YouTube and there's a guy showing you how they can do that trick too. And of course that makes it a cheap trick. And so a collector might not be as interested in that, because your tricks can be imitated very, very easily. And so he wants a jewel. He wants something. Not only does he want a jewel, he wants it done by a very top quality jewel setter. Somebody that really, really knows how to make fine jewelry. Not just jewelry. Rare, fine jewelry that you just can't buy anywhere. That's where wealthier people buy their jewelry. They're not going to go down to Walmart, or they're not even going to go to Target and buy their jewelry. They might, if it's just something they want to go to a concert, they'll be dancing, they might lose it. They might go do something like that. But for the most part, they're going to be looking at something, especially if they're like walking the red carpet at the Emmys or something like that, or the Oscars, and they really want to make a statement to the world about who they are as an individual. Well, that person is going to have a piece and a dress on, like with presidents and president wives, I should say, wear. It's going to make a statement about them. The statement is going to be positive, of course. And of course, what they're going to do is they're going to wear that piece. And of course, other people are going to see it, being influenced by this very influential person. And that's generally how it goes, It goes kind of like that. So, now you can see I do a little bit of finger painting too. But for the most part, I try to paint with my brush. So I do have a tendency to kind of back off a little bit every once in a while to see what I am doing. That's very important. Even in these dark tones, I have a tendency to paint. I like to paint in layers. And just with that semi-tacky layer underneath, just paint another translucent layer right over top of that. That's kind of what I'm doing, trying to create this sort of shadow on this rib cage on this side of this particular character. Again, I don't want to necessarily get rid of the brush strokes I did on the previous day or even earlier painting in this day. What I want to do is just simply add some more on top of that. So there we go. So now that's kind of doing the trick for me. Then to get this really dark tone in here, I'm going to go to some ultramarine blue and a little bit of Mars black, just to make sure that goes back into the crevice. I want that. The cool colors tend to make things fade a little bit more back. And the warm colors, even though they're black, not all black is the same. Some cool color blacks with a little bit of ultramarine blue mixed in will make the blacks seem to go deeper into space, whereas the warm blacks tend to make the blacks pop and come forward a little bit more. It's going to rise forward. So in this case, I wanted to kind of rise forward a little bit. All right, I kind of like this little bit of paint I've done. I'm going to just do that to it, and then I'm going to let that set up. And that's going to be good enough for today. As a matter of fact, there's always something else I'm seeing on something. I'm not just going to do that to it and let it go. I'm going to do also this to it. And I could mess it up. Sometimes I do that. You know, I'm doing something and it's not quite perfect, but good enough, close enough. Instead of me leaving it close enough to come back to hit it another day where I can actually get it exactly more close to what I want. Because again, I want this tone to kind of set up, get dry, you know, and then paint over it yet another time with another coat. And just build up the quality of this painting in here, the quality of how this paint is, you know, so that the paint looks interesting. You know, you want your paint to be interesting. At least I do. Some people maybe not, but I like my paint to look interesting. Okay, so now I'm thinking that's starting to have one set of interest to it. Of course, I'm going to visit it on other days and add more interest. But for right now, it's interesting enough. It's interesting enough. And already, because I'm working this paint a lot, it has a tendency to dry the paint out, and I'm working in very thin layers. And so this paint even starts to stiffen up as I put more and more brush strokes down over top of it. So I think that's enough work on the body right now. I think I did a little something here that I want to kind of fix up a little bit. Don't want that just to go just like that. I don't want to do it too quickly either and mess it up. So again, sometimes I paint the painting on almost not necessarily straight out of the tube, but without medium, I should say, without any medium. But sometimes what I do is, because I want the paint to have some substance to it. I want the paint to have, you know, a sense of presence, you know, to have some interest to it. And I should just take my time with this. I don't want to even, I know I need to get this, but I think sometimes you do things a little bit too fast and you're not really ready for it, you can mess it up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get out on this by painting this in, maybe a little of that. Yeah, I like that. I'm actually liking that a little bit. So I'm getting a little bit, kind of getting my, there we go. It's not too bad. And what happens, especially when you're doing like my secondary coats like this, I've already got my base coat down of paint, or I've got my base painting down. I shouldn't say coat, but I got my base painting down. Sometimes your palette gets, you can have a dirtier palette when you're doing that base painting, because the palette is not as essential to have the clean colors. So a lot of times I'm using just straight colors and not a lot of blending. But then when I start blending more, the colors get a lot more. It's more crucial to have nice, clean colors. So my palette should be just a little bit cleaner. Just a little bit cleaner. All right. Okay, let's see. Hello, Katrina Insminger. How you doing? They're awesome, Pastor Gary. So, hey, Gary, I see 1 of 3 I would like on my wall. You already got one of my paintings on the wall of my ham that I painted on Bernice's basement. Bernice actually paid to frame that. I hope the frame's still good. But yeah, sure, man. Let me know what you want. You know, and we can work some things out, brother. But of course, you know, it's like the Grey Poupon commercial. Pardon me, I would like to have one of your paintings. But of course, you know, that kind of thing. A but of course kind of thing, you know. And I'm kind of accentuating this vein a little bit with a translucent yellow ochre kind of color. And I got this one here with a more yellow. I probably should have hit yellow ochre in that. I think I'm going to have to tamp that down with the finger technique here. The finger blend is what I call it. Well, what I say, if you got a wall, I would love to put a painting on it. That's one of my mottos. A new motto is, if you got a wall, I want to put a painting on it. Doggone it. I'm going to add the doggone it part to it because that's just how I feel about it. Or if you want to commission me to paint something, you know, if you want to say, for example, you want to pick a painting and you want to be the Apostle Paul or somebody, you know. Say if you're really into, you know, your imagery, I could put your face on there. Have you as one of the disciples or something, you know. Who knows, you know. The imagination is what you want to use, invoke. The imagination. You don't want the ordinary. You want the extraordinary. You know, you want the extraordinary, not the ordinary. So by all means, Yes, I love to do some extraordinary things. When it comes to painting, that's what I love to do, extraordinary things. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff going on in this particular painting. As Sister Rebecca Fox used to say in the old days, this painting, yada. She used to say that. She was the most wonderful person of my youth. Almost like a second mom to me. But she had like a Western Virginia accent. She was African American lady. But she had a Western Virginia accent. And I just love the way she used to say certain words. I still can hear her voice when she's calling my brother. My brother's name is Adrian, but his middle name is what he goes by, which is Garrett. Of course, she used to call him Gayet. That's how she pronounced, not Gary, which is the nickname for Garrett. It was Gayet. And I was Steve. That's my nickname, and my name is Steve. But my nickname is Stevie. And I was not Steve, but T-Blah. It's kind of like Steve Blah. I think my grandma Rolette had a certain way of saying my name too. It's a little bit different. Of course, these are all old school people born around the turn of the 19th century. 1910, 1920s. So it was a different kind of person back then, Different individual. Very robust personalities, very, very nurturing individuals, I'm going to say. Very wise individuals, I would also say. But sometimes people think you have to have a PhD or something to be a smart person. But I'm going to argue that point. I think sometimes some of those people who never set foot in a university, some of the smartest, wisest people, if I've ever known, and I've met some PhDs before, doctors and so forth, they can't even shine a flashlight on these people. I ain't even talking about a spotlight. They ain't even good enough for a spotlight. They can't even get with a flashlight with them. And I think Rebecca Fox, she was definitely one of those ladies. She was like my, kind of like my nanny, so to speak. She basically is back in the day when your parents, it was around the time when two parents had to start going out and working. Used to be just the man would go out and do his thing and the woman would stay at home and raise the children. But all of a sudden around in a certain era, it got to be where that was almost impossible to kind of have that lifestyle. Get all the stuff that most Americans wanted. The woman got out there and was doing her women's lib thing or whatever that was, I don't know what it was, but she was doing it. And what happened was you had to have somebody stay home to look after the children. Of course, they won't call children, they will call chillins, or chitlins. Kind of like almost the food, the chitlins. But they weren't chitlins, they were, and then sometimes they were churns, or children, or churns. So depending on what area, because you got a whole lot of African American people coming together from different regions of the state and of the world, or the country, they would pronounce the same thing different ways. I remember we used to do something back in the old days called convocation. We used to go down to Goldsboro, North Carolina. And we were playing a card game. I was playing with these girls. I don't totally remember their name, but it was some cute girls. And I like to talk to people, especially girls. And it was in the kitchen making some food, because the Southern girls, they're going to cook for you. They're going to show you that they got some skills. You might want to marry one of them. So they're going to let you know I'm marriable. Check my chicken out. So they had some chicken that was cooking in the other room. Of course, you're from out of town and you're hungry. And back then, fast food restaurants weren't the way to go. What you want to do is get some home cooking. Some good cooking cooked in a daggone stove over somebody's house. where the person might have known the chicken. You know, want just some unknown chicken from the grocery store. The chicken actually had a life, you know, an existence, you know, amongst the people that was going to eat it before it had to sacrifice itself, you know, for the greater good. But anyway, they were saying, we'll play the chord. It wasn't a chord, but I was used to, and I was saying a chord. I was thinking it's a cord, like a cord that you pull, you know, a rope. It's a cord, you know, a string, a cord. But she was saying the card. I was saying, oh, you mean a card? She said, yeah, the cord. And then it was the chicken. It wasn't chicken. It was several syllables in the word chicken. It was chicken. I can't even always say it, but that's what it was. I was going, oh my gosh, so we're going to have some chicken. First, we're going to play this chord game. Not the chord on the Venetian blinds over there. We're not going to deal with that, but we're actually going to play a card game. Then we're going to have some chicken. Of course, this is the Fox would say Gillet and Tible. So for a long time, I thought my name was Tible. I did not think my name was Stevie. Because Sister Fox was with us all the time. My parents went to work. And I was Tible. For, you know, I mean, I'm about 3 years old, 4 years old. I'm learning to speak for the first time and everything. I was Tible. And then all of a sudden I became Stevie. Oh, okay. So now I'm learning a whole different way to speak now. Because at first I learned to speak and say Tible is my name. And then finally, somebody explained to me, actually your name is Stevie. Just Sister Fox likes to call you Tible. So I said, okay, because Sister Fox is my whole world. My name is actually, I'm supposed to pronounce it Stevie. But for some reason, the way she would say it, I became more fond of that because that was the first time that I was hearing it a lot. Somebody calling my name at me. I was very young, like 3 years old. I kind of started liking Tible better than Stevie. So it's amazing as you go through life, the things you would actually remember and focus on from time to time, especially when you're painting. Mine's drifting all over the place. You're thinking all kinds of stuff. You know? All from your past, all the way down to 3 years old and everything. All the way back up again, then back down again, you know? Okay, so, and I'm going to start just making some refinements on certain things. I think I'm going to improve the way the crown look on my column. It's actually not accurate. And, because I was just kind of gesturing it in. So what I'm going to do is make it a little bit more correct. Right now I put my palette kind of on my actual table palette. So I have two palettes. I have a normal palette. Actually, the crown kind of comes out with this little point right here. The original crown did back then. And I'm looking at an example that I printed off the internet of a column from Luxor. So instead of me doing it the way I had imagined it to go, I'm going to do it the way it actually is on the actual temple. And then actually this little yellow piece doesn't go all the way back. It actually goes kind of up. It kind of stops right there. So I'm going to paint that out. So the piece can be a little bit more accurate. There we go. All right, so now that's starting to look like it's supposed to look. Of course, I probably have to fatten that up some. Let me just add another color. I'm going to use these colors right now because they've been there for about 2 days. Like I say, yesterday I didn't get to do much painting. Well, I didn't get to do any painting because I was at my uncle's funeral. The coolest uncle on the planet Earth. Well, all my uncles was super cool. I got uncles that still living now. My Uncle Arthur Babra, Aretha's dad. He's the coolest uncle. I mean, he's a Korean vet, and I actually able to do a little biography on him, and he was telling about his exploits in Korea, and I was going, oh my God, your country asked you to do all that for you? And a lot of these guys, they go over and they do what they have to do, and they never tell you they were superheroes. Literally. The stuff that you see got the actors make movies about, John Wayne and all these guys. You got Uncle sitting right there who was the John Wayne. He was the actual character. He was the fella. He was the man. And they come back and they never even tell you until they get to be about 80 some years old. And you're doing like a birthday bash. And you break your cameras out and you say, okay, Uncle Arthur, tell me about your life. And of course, he tells you about his life, but some of the most impressionable things on him, of course, when you get older, you reflect on the things that some of the biggest events in your life tend to take more prominence. And that was for him, the Korean War. And I said, oh my gosh, this man has done some incredible things over there in Korea, serving his country honorably, by the way, and never put one accolade out about himself. And then I think, man, could I or would I been able to do what he was asked to do and placed in the same situation? And I would say, wow, that would be a super sacrifice. And so, tremendous sacrifice to my Uncle Arthur Anderson, babe, bruh. He's the man. He did it. He paid the dues. And he is very humble about that. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for him, as well as my uncle whose funeral was yesterday, Uncle Harold. He was in the Air Force. He served also with honors in the Air Force and did 2 tours there, what I found out yesterday at the funeral. So I have some amazing uncles, actually. Absolutely amazing individuals, I must say. And I'm very proud of them. Extremely proud of them. And, so that's a little bit of family legacy there. Now, some people don't believe in wars. I mean, I don't believe in wars either, but sometimes your country asks you to do certain things. They don't give you much explanation. They just say, look, this is for you to do. If you're going to be a citizen, we need this right now. So can you do this for us? And so you have the choice to either do it or not do it. And of course, a lot of people choose to do it because, by the way, they do get a lot of benefit from being an American citizen. And so they want to, do their part, play the role that they need to play to ensure whatever needs to get insured. And in that case, it was to stop the spread of communism that was going into the Korean Peninsula. Hence, today we have a place called South Korea. There would be no South Korea if it wasn't for people like my uncle who went over there and basically helped to give them their freedom from North Korea. Now, I'm not saying that to say that North Korea, not really making a judgment, passing a judgment on any particular group or organization, because I think they had a right to govern themselves the way they want to. But in terms of what was asked and the knowledge that was available at the time, people had to do what they were asked to do by the government. I mean, it wasn't really a whole lot of choice, especially with the climate at the time, the way things were, the views of that day, in terms of what they thought about communism and what they thought about the spread of it and whatnot. Most of us don't even know what communism is now. I mean, we got communists and we buy a lot of stuff from China. And what does it mean? So, it's like, however, it still doesn't stop the fact that people are asked to do certain things. And they honorably go do it without a whole lot of problems. Which is what my uncle did. Both my uncles did. One was in France, and the other was in Korea. So one got a little bit better scenario than the other in terms of France is a very cool place to be, I think, in terms of some of the culture it has there, especially for an American, I think, a person coming from an American culture. I mean, there's some things that you can relate to there in France that's familiar to you, I guess, a little bit more so than other cultures. Because coming from a American English-speaking culture, you can see how that would be. So anyway, what I'm doing is putting in some more of this hieroglyphics, also called meta-nature. And basically these are words. And inside of this is called a cartouche. And that is the name of the king. Ursama Ra Te Sepet Ra, also known as Ramesses. Just as a little bit of trivia. Yes, I am into history as well as painting, as you can see. I am a fine arts painter. I'm also a historian. And I'm also a lot of things. I can really be, anybody can be anything they want to be. But I actually have some pieces of paper that said I'm supposed to be these things. For all that's worth, I do have them. Not to say that you need those pieces of paper to be a painter, and not say that I'm the best painter in the world because I have them, or even the most successful painter in the world because I have them. But I do have them. So why not talk about it a little bit? Okay, so painting the hieroglyphics there. And again, the Kemetic kings, the Kemetic kings really wanted for people to know what they were doing in the kingdom. It was very important for them, for people to actually know what they were doing, you know. You didn't want to just go around and you're the king and the people say, well, what in the world we got a king for? I mean, what in the world is he doing? He's just sitting there getting all of the spoils of the land. I mean, how is this working out? I mean, the king has to do something for the people. That's the whole idea of having a king, is that he's actually protecting and looking out for the people. So I'm explaining to Uraeus, I was explaining that earlier, what that meant. And of course, it meant protection, and it meant being able to survive as a culture. Even though hardships come through the leadership of the king, you're going to survive. So that's kind of what it means. That's a translation of that.